Thank you, Molly. So welcome to part 2 of Emergence, putting ABCD into practice. So we're here today to continue our learning with Deb Wisniewski on the asset-based community development process and how it pertains to our work with connecting people with disabilities to the community so that they can be involved in contributing and enjoy community life to its fullest extent. And so during the next couple of hours, we're going to have a really interactive time with Deb. So be prepared to take quizzes, be put in breakout rooms and contribute to the discussion. Feel free to use the chat and, put your questions there. We'll make time for that. Right now we're pretty small, but I would imagine we'll be growing here as more people join. Just try to make sure that your microphones are muted. Presenters always love it if you want to keep your cameras on, it gives them a little feedback as to how people are taking the information, but feel free to do what you need to do. So with that, I will hand it over to Deb. Thanks, Deb, for joining us again today.
Well, thank you very much, Shannon. It's good to see everyone. And I'm going to start off by sharing my screen here. So let's go there. All right. So yeah, if you just joined, I encourage people to post where they're joining us from and post something about what you're looking forward to today. There's a good chunk of the day that'll be left after this, after we are done with this webinar. And, it's just a fun way of doing this. And I see a number of people who are interested in the Packer game tonight. So that's always pretty exciting. I forgot that today was the Packer game. How could I forget that? It's sacrilegious to forget that. All right, so thanks everybody for being here again today. I'm going to review a couple things and we're going to do some fun stuff. It is going to be interactive today. I know it gets tiring to have your video camera on all the time. So if you don't have it on while I'm yapping, that's totally okay. But I do want to encourage you to have your video cameras on when you're in small groups so you can see each other when you're having conversations. We've tried to build in some interactive stuff here. So we'll see how that goes. These were the agreements we talked about last time. As you recall, I shared a poem called Brave Space, and we talked about how this is a brave space, because sometimes we share things that are from our heart, and it's really wonderful when everyone shows up and recognizes that and participates. So minimizing outside distractions. I know kids, dogs, spouses, enough said, but I've got hopefully my dog won't start barking. I forgot to get him in here. This is a place for learning and we're learning together. So look for connections, participate, share your ideas, ask questions. You are in charge of your own learning. I'm not the expert on what you guys do. I can share some ideas, some tools, but it's really going to be up to you all to think about how does this apply to what you do? How does that tool or that concept fit into the place and the space where you work? And then finally, taking care of yourself. We've got 2 hours here where we're going to be together, and we're gonna go right through here. But if you need to take a break personally, feel free to do that. We are recording this, so if you are called away or you join late or whatever, you'll be able to catch up with everything else, everything you missed, hopefully. These were the learning outcomes that I shared last time. Learning the basics of ABCD, what is it? The 6 assets, 3 characteristics, about discovering a person's gifts, what to do with those gifts, recognizing how relationships build community, identifying tools, and specifically talking more about asset mapping. So some of this stuff we did last time, and some of this stuff we're going to do this time, and there is a little overlap. But first, I'm going to have you guys do a quiz, pop quiz on what we talked about last time. So I'm going to switch screens here, and I'm hoping you'll be able to see this. If you all remember last time, Shannon put a link in the chat just now, and you can, if you have another device, a phone or whatever, or you can go to menti.com and add that code in there. I see people are already joining, and it's so fun to see all these cool little icons jumping on the screen. Very nice. So I'll give people a minute to finish joining, and we're going to have a little quiz about last time. Okay, so you could be looking at your screen to do that, and I'm going to go to the first question. I'll give people just 30 seconds more here to join. Okay, we got a good chunk of you in here, so I will go. Oh, wait, more people coming. I'll wait. All right, I'm gonna go to the next screen and give you your first question, which will pop up on your device. Wherever you joined, you will see the first question. And for each question, not to put any pressure on you or anything, but you'll have 30 seconds to respond to that question. And you'll get sort of a little red line on your device or whatever that will tell you that you're reaching the end of that time. Okay. Oh, these are fun. I love all the little icons that jump on the screen here for me. All right. So I think we're about ready to go the first one. Oh, hold on a minute. Come on. So what is ABCD? Look at your phone or your device, and you're going to have choices. And you have 20 more seconds to answer this. One, let's see, time's up, and now we'll get the results. All right, so we had some people picked A, beginning of the alphabet. Some people picked B, a method for identifying and mobilizing community assets. Some people picked C, a lens for looking at the strengths of people and communities. D, a process for developing a plan for your financial assets. And indeed, the correct answer was E, which was choices B and C. So I made that a little tricky on you guys, but we're going to go to the next question. Ready? Oops. I think we're going. There we go. All right, the second question is popping up on your screen. Which of these is not a characteristic of ABCD? I see people are voting. I can tell you're voting because on my screen, there's a little number popping up in the right-hand corner. It shows everyone's voting on what they think the answer is. So which is not a characteristic? 3, 2, 1, time's up. And let's see if we get our results here. All right, so we had a couple people vote for the first and second answer, but 27 of you got the right answer. It starts by reforming large institutional programs. Absolutely, we don't, ABCD does not focus on large institutional programs at all. The three characteristics really are that it's asset-based, so it starts with the strengths of a community. It's internally focused, which means it really is looking at the assets and building on those assets of a local community. It doesn't look outside at, outside relationships of the community, let's say outside professionals or large systems. And the third one is it's all about relationships, which to me is one of the strongest. Yeah, I know. Somebody said that they missed the word not. So you guys are totally forgiven. I know, I told you there's trick questions here. So let's go to the third question. Here, let's see. All right, question 3. when we start exploring local community assets, which one do we start with? So there's 6 assets, and which one is the one that ABCD starts with? I'll give you a hint. It's the one that's typically forgotten about by most community development models or approaches. But we in ABCD think it's the most important one. All of these are really, all of the ones you see there, by the way, are assets. All right, time's up. Let's see how you guys did. So there, we had it spread across here a little bit. So some folks were looking at associations, which is, I would actually think that associations come close on the heels of individuals, because individuals and associations are the ones that most community models tend to forget about. Mostly we start looking at resources in terms of services, which sort of falls under local institutions. Physical assets are another one that sometimes we forget about because we take them for granted. And culture and stories, I'm going to give you guys a half a point for that one if I could, because I always say that culture and stories is really woven among all the other assets. And it's funny because that was an asset that was not originally included when McKnight and Kretzmann first began articulating what ABCD is. So well done. Okay, next question. All right, we got 2 more questions left. This is question 4. What can we do when we know a person's gifts? So you're going to look at these choices here. We can find community opportunities for them to share their gifts. We can build mutual relationships. We can determine what services they're eligible for. We can make connections to associations where they can share their gifts. Or all answers except for C. Three, two, one, time's up. All right, let's see how you did on that one. All right, yes. So yes, B is correct, but it's also correct that we can find community opportunities for that person to share their gifts, and we can also help them make connections. But B is also correct because, you know, it's about building relationships that are mutual and that are based on gifts, interests, and passions. So A, B, and D were all correct. C, not so much and you guys all got that correct, that it's not C. So well done, well done. And I think we're gonna go to the last one here. Come on. I think we're going to the last one. All right, question number 5, here it comes. True or false, a faith community, such as a church, mosque, temple, is an example of a local association. We talked about that, I think, a little bit last time, but see what you guys think. Three, two, 1, 0. Time's up. And let's see what the answer there is. You guys were split. The correct answer is it depends. I'm not sure if I talked about this example last time. You know, a lot of churches or faith communities are institutions, in fact. So for example, I often use the Roman Catholic Church as an example of an institution, because if you're talking about the church at large, or if you're even talking about a local parish, you know, the priest is in charge, the bishop is in charge, you know, the local bishop is in charge. So it's an institution. But if we look at the other end of the spectrum, and for that, I often use an example of the Quakers. So the Quakers are totally associational. Nobody's really in charge. It's really shared leadership, shared responsibility. And so that makes them much more a local association. Most faith communities fall someplace in between as a whole entity. And even within faith communities, Even, for example, within the Roman Catholic Church, which is more of an institution, you could have some associations within that church. So you may have a group of parents whose kids go to the school and they meet together, and that's an association of people within that faith community. So, it depends is actually the correct answer. So that was truly, truly a trick question. Let's see how everybody did here. All right, there are all the points. All right, we got some people that got 100%, it looks like, and a lot of people that got 400. Awesome job. It's a tie for those folks that signed in. Well done, everybody. Oh, and look, we even get little confetti falling on my screen. I don't know if you can see that on my screen, but. Okay, I'm going to switch back to our slides. Hope that was fun for you guys. I thought, I was trying to make a fun way of us reviewing, and just for folks that may have missed part of last time, catching you up on some of the key concepts that we talked about last time. Thanks everybody for your participation. I had a lot of fun. I hope you had fun. So let's see. So today we're going to focus on putting ABCD into practice. We're going to really talk about some practical ideas. I want to mention, I'm going to share some tools. In fact, I'm going to talk about 5 different tools today. Some of them were just mentioned briefly. Some of them I'll go a little bit more into, because we're trying to share so many different tools. We will be sharing, I'll be sending out resources for all of these tools after the fact within the next week. I also want to mention that these are not ABCD tools, if you will. They're not tools specifically for ABCD. Some of them really came from ABCD practices, and others are tools that we borrow or that we use because they're so compatible with ABCD perspective. Oh, I also want to mention too, before anybody asks me, because I know someone always wants to know, I'll be sending out the PowerPoint as a PDF also with the resources. Okay. All right, so today we're going to be talking about, the first thing we're going to talk about is learning conversations. One-to-one learning conversations. Those are exactly what they sound like. They are meeting one-to-one with you and another person to learn about that person. It's not an opportunity to convince them of anything. It's not an opportunity to enlist them to do something. It's to learn about them. And specifically, learning conversations could, well, there's actually multiple reasons you could do learning conversations, but some of my favorites are to discover, first of all, is to discover what someone is passionate about, what they care about, and connected to that is what are they motivated to do? All right, so putting that together, we want to learn what someone cares enough about that they are motivated to act on it. All right, so keep that in the back of your mind. There's a difference between opinion and motivated to act. So my friend and colleague, Mike Green, would always say, as you're driving down the highway and you see the signs on the side of the road that say, the 4-H group of Door County cleans this highway, right? He sees those signs and he thinks, that's just great. I love the environment. I'm so glad people are cleaning up and taking care of it. And I'm really glad they're doing it because I don't want to do it. All right. So that's an example of something he cares about, but he doesn't care about it enough to be motivated to do it. Or he doesn't care about it, I shouldn't say enough, in a way that he's motivated to act on that caring. He has many things he cares about. Each of us do. We can't act on everything we care about, right? So we want to find out what people care about that they're willing to act on. So we're going to practice this a little bit. And you guys, oops, I'm going too fast here. We're going to put you in breakout rooms. We're going to put you in breakout rooms for 10 minutes. And we're going to try and put you in groups of 2. if you, I'm going to say this right up front so you know, if you go to a breakout room and the other person isn't there or there's technical problems, you can leave your room and come back to the main room and we'll send you to another group. Also, depending on the number of people that are in groups, some people may be in a group of 3. So we're going to have 2 people talking and 1 person observing if you're in a group of 3. Otherwise, for 5 minutes, 1 person is going to talk about where they live and how long they've lived there. Okay, got that? That's the question. Where do you live and how long have you lived there? And the other person is the one that's trying to learn about the person answering that question. So you know, feel free to interact, you know, talk to each other, you know, ask other questions, but really try to have a conversation for a good solid 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, you'll switch roles and, you know, have this second person doing it. So don't have a back and forth answering the question, if you understand what I'm saying. 5 minutes for 1 person, then switch roles, 5 minutes for the other person. Don't stop early, try to fill up that time and pay attention to what you're learning about that person. And if you're an observer, if you're in a group of 3 and you take on the role of observer, I want you to pay attention to what's going on with the dynamics in that group and what you're learning about the 2 people in that group. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Let me just, oops, I'm trying not to go forward here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and I think Shannon's gonna put us in group, put you all in groups for 10 minutes. Right, Shannon? All right, I think everybody is coming back. All right, I want you now to file away what you learned. Don't forget about it. We're gonna come back to it in just a couple minutes. All right, so keep in mind, think about what you learned, and I'm gonna go and share my screen again. Okay, so this is the slide we left off on here. So before I have you give me some feedback about what you learned, I want to talk about the power of good questions. I am a fanatic about questions. I think questions are more powerful than answers because questions can really stimulate curiosity. Questions can stimulate learning. Questions can stimulate application of ideas. You know, good questions are really helpful to have. And when you want to learn about somebody, or you know, you're engaged in that, it's almost like the discovery phase, right? You've heard about discovery in customized employment, for example, and other fields we talk about discovery. This is really part of that discovery of who a person is. And again, going back to what do they care about enough that they will act on it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the power of questions here. So as we think about putting ABCD in practice, sometimes without knowing it, we start with what we think the answer is. And I'm going to tell you a story about this in a minute. So we start with what, even when we think we're like, want to learn what people think, we already have an answer in the back of our mind. And what we're actually doing is recruiting people to implement that answer. And then we like throw our hands up because they're not motivated, right? Because we're looking to answers to the problem of why aren't these people motivated to implement the answer that I have in the back of my mind, either consciously or subconsciously. So here's my story. I want to tell you about this as an example. So this is a true story. A colleague of ours at ABCD worked with a particular city, and in that city there was a gentleman running to become mayor. And anytime you run for office, you have a platform, right? And so he had a platform that included lots of different things, including that he was going to help this one neighborhood that was very poor and had been defined as struggling. He was going to help that neighborhood. So the gentleman was elected. He became the mayor. And he directed his staff to go to that community and to start working with them around the issues of drugs. Because, there was a lot of drug dealing in that community. There were, there was syringes found by the playground and near the school, and they were worried about drug dealing happening near the school. So the staff went into the community, called a community meeting. Lots of people came, and they talked about their answer, which was, the issue here is drugs. We have to do something about drugs. If we do something about drugs, this neighborhood's problems will be over. But lo and behold, people, subsequent meetings, there were less and less people coming, and the people that did come didn't seem very engaged. And they could have easily said, these people are not motivated to do anything about drugs in their neighborhood. They're not motivated to improve their neighborhood. When in fact, they had started with the answer, which they thought was drugs. So instead, what they did was they went back to the drawing board and started with questions. What do you care about? What are the issues here? What do you want to work on? And they really explored that and found out that people were really concerned about rats. There were a lot of rats in the neighborhood, hanging. There was a lot of trash on corners or behind the fast food places, and rats would congregate there. And just the week before, someone had found a rat in their child's room, and they were worried about disease and biting and fleas and all that kind of stuff. Well, lo and behold, when they really started with questions about what do people care about, what were they motivated to do something about, they found out that they were very concerned about rats, and that they were willing to work on it, and they were offering their time, their skills, their passion. And then you can use that connection to help build relationships. Story, because from that story, we got the phrase, if it's rats, it's rats. In other words, we might think the problem or the issue that needs to be addressed is drugs. But in reality, that's not what that person or that community cares about. What they really care about, is their rats. And we have to discover, if we start with open minds and lots of questions and a curious mind, we'll discover what people care about, what they have to offer, what is motivating them to act. And then we can use that to make connections, build relationships, and really get people, if we're really looking at the community as a whole in that situation, we can find where people want to connect with each other and are willing to join hands, if you will, to work on the issues that they care about. So this is where I want you to jump into the chat. I'm going to share, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second so we can have people share in the chat. Besides how long they've lived, where they live, and how long they've lived there, what did you learn about that person? If you know specifically about what you think might motivate that person to act, then give me some ideas about that. But even if you learn something else about the person that has nothing to do with where they live and how long they live there, that would be great. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask you to share in the chat. Okay, come on, screen. There we go. I'll give you all a couple of minutes to do that. Oh, Heather had a great observation about when I was talking about the power of questions. Questions can help you look deeper into your own answer, right? Why you chose that answer and what can back it up. So here's some of the things that we're learning from people. My partner loves dogs. My partner is a single mom, has a horse, talked about work, 2 toddlers at home. One person was observing and heard that they came back, that the 2 are where they came back to time and time again, or where they're from and near to family supports. There's lots of stuff like that. You really do find out what their motivations are. Here's someone that's really motivated because of their experiences supporting individuals with disabilities in high school and college, the connections to community, resources. what their passions are. These are great. Wishing for more diversity where you live. Right. So, that's a really interesting comment. Finding out what people wish for is a really good avenue to look for, are they motivated to do something about that? I'm going to talk about some sort of a good series of questions in a minute, but these are great, you guys. Yep. These are things that people really care about. Super. There's some great answers in here. I mean, all of them are great answers, but thank you for sharing all these. Kyra, I'm just going to mention the one you just posted about thinking they wanted to move away, but decided to stay close to home near family to be able to help with kids and not have to travel. Obviously looking at that response, I am intrigued by the idea that that person is really motivated by family, so much so that they didn't move away, even though that was one of the things they wanted to do. So family is clearly an interest of that person. I also find that a lot of people will do something because of their kids, right? I don't know about you guys, but I joined a lot of things, became active in a lot of things because of my daughter when she was young. So you learn a lot about people. So you guys could keep putting those away in there. There's some really great stuff in there. And I'm gonna keep moving on here, sharing my screen again. Let me find it. There it is. So that question that I used, where do you live and how long have you lived there? I think if I asked you guys how threatening that question was, most of you would deem it not very threatening. It seems pretty factual, right? Where do you live? And you could do that even in a neighborhood. Here I live on an island in Wisconsin. I could say to somebody, where on the island do you live? Or where in this community do you live? How long have you lived here? Have you always lived here? Or, did you move here? And most people have no problems answering that question. In fact, it's always a joke that when people meet you here in my community, their first question is, who are you and where do you live? In other words, whose house do you live in? And so, they want to know where you live. And nobody has a problem answering those questions. So I have this series of 5 questions that I often use as I'm going through these one-to-one conversations or just discovering about somebody, just really wanting to learn about somebody. So I always start with that question, where do you live? How long have you lived there? And you might find out things like, well, I've lived here all my life because my family is here and I want to stay close to my family. Or I just moved here for a job and I don't know another living soul in the city. I'm thinking about my daughter who just moved to a place where she doesn't know anybody. So you learn stuff about people. The second question is, what do you love about this community or your community? Again, a very non-threatening question, right? It's a question that people are rarely asked. And in most cases, people love to tell you what they love about their community. Then we start getting into, what would they change? Not what's wrong with their community, but if you had a magic wand, what would you change? And I always like that magic wand question because it really opens the door. It's not about, oh, we got to fix this in our community, or this is wrong, or transportation is horrible, which, by the way, it's horrible whether you live in an urban area or a rural area. Everybody will tell you transportation is horrible. But if you have a magic wand, what would you change? You don't get stuck in talking about the failures, if you will, of your community. Change could be anything. It could be, building on what's already there. And it asks the listener to suggest ways to make that change, right? So how would you change it? If you had a magic wand, how would you change your community? What would you change? Then when we get to question 4, we're really starting to get into, what are you willing to do? Is there something you can do to make this change happen? What gifts and talents do you have? Part of going through this series of questions in this order really helps you build a level of trust. Whether or not you ask all these questions on one conversation or whether you spread them out over multiple conversations. We start with the least threatening questions, and people get really fired up about the question, about their ideas. And by this time, when you get to question 4, you'll find people are more willing to trust. But sometimes I will take a month just to explore questions 1 and 2 with someone before I even get to talking about community, just because I really want to get to know what they care about. And then question 5 is where you start building those connections. Let's say you find out that someone says, I really love art, but I don't know anything. One of the things I would change is it's really hard to find places where you can connect with other artists or make art or whatever, or learn about art. And that's where you can say, would you be willing to meet with other people to work on this? Or, because you're really interested in this. And, in the meantime, other people are finding out, or you're finding out about other people or associations in the community. Remember, we talked about associations are those informal and formal networks. Maybe there's a local art association. Maybe there's a coffee shop that has art on the walls that could help you connect with other artists. So these questions are really a lovely progression to think about using as a tool. If I'm using these questions to learn about a community as opposed to learning about a specific individual person, which I often do. In community building, that's what we do. We are learning about the community, right? So if I'm using these questions to learn about a community, my final question always is, who else should I talk with? Right? Because the person I'm talking with will be able to connect me up with people I might not even know exist. They might be willing to send that person an email or let that person know that I'll be contacting them. And it's an introduction, if you will. Whereas if I just cold call people, I may not know that there's a grandma who picks up all the kids after school, a whole bunch of kids after school, and takes them to her house and does tutoring and snacks with kids after school. I might not even know that grandma exists. And in fact, she's like a real critical part of that community. So that's one of the things that you will think about as you're thinking about these one-to-one conversations. So when you have learning conversations with somebody, come to listen to learn with no predetermined outcome. Again, it's not about enlisting that person to volunteer or to tell your organization what to do. It's about learning about them and what they care about. I always say 45 minutes is plenty. Set your alarm so you don't have to keep looking at your phone, and stick to it. Sometimes at the end of 45 minutes, you have a great conversation going and you think you want to keep talking. Don't do it. It's easier to stop the conversation and say, I promised you only 45 minutes. I'd love to meet again if we can meet again. Again, start with the easy questions and finish by who else should I talk with? A variation on these are what we call walk and talk. So instead of meeting over coffee or in a public place, or if someone wants to meet with you in their home, you could just meet and walk. And often walking side by side is easier for a lot of people because they don't have you're not face to face intense. Plus in the time of COVID, sometimes it's safer to walk side by side. You can also use these questions if you're holding community conversations. I think a lot of you have participated in variations of community conversations. I know that the board has held community conversations at times. Various initiatives have held community conversations. The World Cafe is a great model that you can use the way they wanted to, the way they lay it out, or you can modify it. I use it all the time in modified sort of structures. And it's a way to get people in your community together in groups to talk to each other in groups. There's been a lot more World Cafe or community conversations, for example, held on Zoom since COVID hit. But it is a chance to talk about questions that really matter to a community. I'm not going to say much more about World Cafe, but I will, and community conversations, but I'll include some resources on this for y'all. All right. The next tool. This tool basically has one slide. And this to me is one of the most powerful tools I have in my pocket. This tool can be used either as you're thinking about individual people that you may support or work with and how much control or power they have in their own life, or it could be programmatic tool where you think about the programs and services that you offer and how much control the people who receive services have in that program or service or that organization. Okay, so I'm going to talk through this a little bit. And by residents, we mean community residents. Okay, so we start at the bottom of the ladder. And we're really thinking about how much power people have. I wanted to mention this in, as part of the independent living movement, there's a phrase called nothing about us without us. And this power ladder really parses that out and talks about the various ways that people can be engaged in meaningful ways in anything that affects their lives. Okay, so we start at the bottom of the ladder where the community residents are recipients. So in other words, they receive services or information from the, I'll just go with organization at this time. Okay, you guys can think about this in terms of if you work with individual people. So in other words, the only power a person might have as a recipient is they can participate or not participate, right? Information or the services accepted. Sometimes you will see, you may have people who can't verbally tell you they're not accepting, but you know by their behavior that they're choosing not to accept, right? They're not compliant, if you will. I'm using that word in quotes. I have seen that written in reports that someone is not being compliant. And that is actually an example of them exercising what they see and how they feel they have power, whether they're able to verbalize that or not. So people can either participate or not participate. They can accept services or information or not. And that's pretty much all of us. We all have that choice, right? Then we go up another rung. And as we're thinking about an organization, this from an organizational perspective, we think about residents as information sources. So in other words, we might have focus groups. We might say, oh, we want to have a focus group of participants or a focus group of parents, or we might survey families. You know, organizations are really great at sending out surveys, and those surveys are really valuable. But people have the option of participating or not participating in those surveys or in those focus groups. But it is an opportunity for them to give some information to that organization, right? To tell that organization what they think. So then we go up to the third rung where we think of residents as advisors or advocates. So this is more of a, I think of this as a more structured kind of opportunity for people to participate, where it's a little deeper than just being part of a, you know, a focus group now and then, or a survey that's sent out now and then. It really is a more structured opportunity for people who receive services to participate in things like goal setting, planning, implementation. You know, there may be an advisory group of some sort, right? But I always point out the name advisory group has the word advisory in it. So in other words, these folks are giving you advice. And by the nature of the definition of the word advice, the organization is free to accept or reject that advice, right? So people have a little bit more power here in that they can be really more intimately involved with the organization, but the power really still ultimately resides with the organization, right? The residents can't say this change must be made. If you have an advisory group who has that power, they're not really advisory. which is great, which is really great. But if they, unless they have that power to make change without the approval or involvement of the organization, they are, you know, if the organization is the one that ultimately says, yes, we will do this or not do this, then the ultimate power there still resides in the organization. And residents have greater power than they did as information sources, but they still have, there's still that unequal, if you will, relationship between them. Then we go to the top of the ladder. So we have residents or people who receive services are actually in control. I also point out that this could be co-control, but again, it is true co-control. So in other words, residents can't make changes without the organization, and the organization can't make changes without the residents. It has to be an agreement kind of thing. It's not about having one person with a disability on your board of 20 people. That's not co-control. That is winds up being tokenism. You know, it really is about a fair and equal sharing of control over key aspects of the program, of the organization, of the activity, whatever it is. So in some situations, an organization as a whole may not have residents or people who receive services in control or co-control of the organization of a whole. However, there may be aspects of the organization's services where people who receive those services are in control of those particular aspects of it. So you can really sort of break this apart a little bit and dive a little deeper into it. So I'm going to show the next slide, and we're going to be putting you all in groups. And Shannon or Molly, can you guys put these questions in the chat?
Yep.
If I go to the next slide. Great.
Yep. And
thank you.
I'm going to be the breaker. I'm going to be doing the rooms. Molly's computer, her Zoom is like frozen on her screen in a way.
Oh, no.
So.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. Thank you.
Yep.
So we're going to put you guys in groups of 3. And again, you know, even if somebody gets lost along the way, you should have at least a group of 2. If you wind up in a group by yourself, feel free to come back to the main room and we'll rearrange, we'll put you in a different group. But we want you to think about this. As you think about people who receive services from your organization or through your work, where are people right now on the ladder? And also be thinking about how you might help people move up the ladder. Are there aspects of what you do where you might see people getting more involved, having more power within it? Okay. And Shannon, how much time do you have on the clock for us here?
I think we have 10 minutes in the room. Would that be sufficient?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That'll get you guys talking about it. Yes, I'll go back. Somebody wants to go back to the power ladder here. And you know what? Let me just, I should have thought to type this into the chat. Yeah. I'll just quick jot this in here. I'm almost done. Hopefully that provides you enough information. So residents as recipients, residents as information sources, and residents as advisors or advocates, and finally residents in control, okay, or co-control. All right, I'm going to stop sharing so we can put you in your group.
Yeah, and then I'm going to have to probably move some people too, it looks like, now that I'm perusing through. So we'll get them started.
Great, thank you. Right. We have a few more folks coming. We'll just give them about 10 more seconds here, and then I think everybody will be back. All right, looks like everyone is on their way back here. I'm going to ask you to just share in the chat your thoughts about this power ladder. If you are thinking, oh, this is the best thing ever, I can't wait to make copies and put them all over our offices. Actually, I know somebody who did that, believe it or not. At an art museum, they did this. You can put that in there. If you're one of the folks that thinks, I always call them the yeah, but, yeah, that sounds good, but feel free to put that in the chat. And in the meantime, while people are putting stuff in the chat, I'd like some volunteers to tell me a little bit about what they discussed and just whatever you want to share from your group. So do I have a volunteer? You can just take your mic off mute and jump in.
I'll go.
Thanks, Kim.
We thought that the ladder was great. Really good analogies. I think that you can bring up. I mean, we talked about how, you know, people, you can go up and down those rungs. You know, you're not wed to one. You're never going to stay there. You might go down, you might go up. But as far as our consumers, we kind of felt like we kind of have to be on the same run. We have to be there with them. So we're not pulling them up or dragging them down. You have to get on their level and work towards, you know, work your way up, but you have to do it together. Because you can't do it for them ultimately, but I think that it's great. I'll definitely use that analogy.
I'll send out a copy of just that slide separately. So if you are the person that wants to make a copy and put it up over your desk or, you know, in your coffee break room or wherever at work, feel free to make lots of copies of them, share them with people, whatever. You'll get a digital copy of it. How about, thanks, Kim, for sharing that. How about somebody else? Let's have someone else share your thoughts about it.
I was going to add that one thing that came from our discussion was that need for support from leadership to make that change, you know, to move up on that ladder.
Yes. And you know what, Carrie, I'm glad you bring that up because as I look at that power ladder, we all know that inherently the organization is going to have more power than the people that receive services. And that is true no matter what organization you work with, unless it's an organization that is truly only people who benefit from that organization's services, right? Whatever. And I'm not just talking about people who have labels of disability. I'm talking about any group. We could be talking about teen moms. We could be talking about single parents. We could be talking about any group that has some sort of label that traditionally puts them on the fringes, or we could be just talking about families. You know, I work with some children's museums, and we're often talking about how family members don't really have any power when it comes to what the Children's Museum does for families. And it really is the organizations themselves, those institutions, if you will, that have the sort of the power inherent in them. And as people who work for institutions, we want to work with our leadership, or if we're leaders, we want to think about our role and our organization's role in making space. How do we move the organization out of the central part of having power and move us into more of a supporting role, if you will? Okay, now let me have one more person. Who else would like to comment? One more person.
So Deb, my partner and I talked about that we both work with the youth, and it was kind of hard to place them on the ladder in any one point because they're not fully part of their plan sometimes. Sometimes it's the parents who participate in that too. So it's hard to place those people on the ladder at times, or even people with disabilities that have a guardian or something like that. So we both agreed on that.
Yeah, you know, it's very challenging sometimes if we have people who, particularly people who can't speak up for themselves. Plus, I think sometimes, you know, we talk about kids who are not engaged in their plan or youth that don't want to be part of it. That's their way of demonstrating the power that they do have, which is to participate or not participate. So I think it's incumbent on us to be challenged by that and to try to figure out ways that they can have more power in their own life. Because, you know, from an ABCD perspective, we're saying the ABCD perspective is very in tune with that independent living concept of nothing about us without us. The idea that the people that are most affected should be the people that have the most say. And if there aren't ways for people to do that, then we have to start thinking about how to create ways for them to have that opportunity. You know, so some of the power that we have as institutions or people that work for institutions is trying to figure that out, is trying to figure out how can I make space so this person has more of a say in their life, or more in a say in this program, or more of a say in what happens to them on a day-to-day basis. You know, it goes back to that motivation to act. You know, if somebody's not, I always go back to, Paul White. I don't know if any of you guys remember Paul White, but Paul White used to always say, behavior is communication. And that stuck with me. And I think that really jives with the power ladder. If someone is not behaving in a certain way or choosing to behave in ways that we think they're not interested or they don't like something or whatever, that is communication, right? So what are they saying about how they feel about the power that they have in their life? So if someone is having challenges, having more power in their life, I think that the message to us is not that they're not capable, but we haven't figured out a way to support them having that power. Okay, so I want to say that one more time. It's not that people are not capable of having more power, more say in their life. We just haven't figured out ways for them to be able to do that. And I think that's a big challenge. I recognize the day-to-day challenge of that in some situations. All right, I'm going to go to the chat, see if there's anything else. Some people say this was really hard. It is really hard, and you will find that different aspects of your program is in, you know, or different organizations are in different places, and that fluctuates. Yeah, this is a great tool to go along with person-centered planning and thinking about that. And, you know, if we are person-centered, you know, part of that, of having a person at the center, is having power in their life. Really looking at ways to communicate. And, you know, here's the thing too, this last one was letting them know they're in control of setting their goals. You know, I got to tell you, as a parent of someone who had an IEP and has disabilities, has had both hidden and obvious disabilities in her life, and as a parent of someone like that as well, you know, there's that trust factor too, right? If someone says, I have, or my child has more power in their life, what makes me want to trust them when they say that? What makes me want to trust that if I make a decision or my child makes a decision that is obviously the quote unquote wrong decision, that we're not going to lose services or suffer in some way, you know, all that kind of stuff. So along with the power, we got to talk about trust at times too. So this is, you know, this is the kind of topic I'd love to have, like a community of practice around, if you will, where we meet and really dig into, you know, ideas and stories and stuff like that. Because, you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg for this conversation. And I really appreciate you guys participating in this. And in the interest of time, we're gonna move on here. I'm gonna share my screen again. I get to the right place. All right, we're gonna move on and talk about asset mapping. And asset mapping is something that is a word, is a phrase or a title that gets thrown around a lot. This is really one of those tools that came most directly out of ABCD. You know, I said we borrow liberally from all kinds of practices and ideas and stuff, but asset mapping is something that really has come out of ABCD and thinking about assets of a community. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is. I'm going to talk about why we do it, and just a brief intro in how you might do it. So the first thing is that it's a process, and it's a process for identifying the assets of a community. And we'll talk about why this is important in just a second, but I want to go through these points right here first. The first one being it's created by community members, not by the organization. I've seen lots of organizations say, we're going to create an asset map, and they create something, but it doesn't reflect what the people of that community believe is important. So that's a piece of this. When we're talking about assets, in a lot of ways, assets are not objective, they are subjective, meaning that assets are in the eyes of the beholder, right? So we want asset maps to reflect what community members think are important. Or if you're trying to do individual asset mapping, which you can do, you know, what are the assets that an individual has in their life? Again, these are assets that they value, that they recognize as important. The next thing is, it's not the same as a resource directory. So often I hear people say that they have created asset maps, and it's a list of all the services and programs in a community, when in fact, asset maps should reflect those 6 assets.
I don't know if it's my end, but Deb, you're frozen. Is she frozen for everyone else?
Relationships or connections between people
Hey,
around
Deb,
shared.
do you want to
Yeah.
back up about 30 seconds? You froze there for a moment.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, so we're talking about the assets of an asset map. Instead of just being services in that community. So there are the assets of the individual, individuals in that community, their gifts and talents. We're talking about the associations, the formal and informal networks and connections between people, the clubs, the associations, the groups that are present in a community of people who share a passion. We're talking about local institutions. So that's where you start getting into the programs and services in a local community. But we're also talking about the economic assets of a community, the physical assets of a community, both human-made and nature-made, buildings, parks, streams, lakes, forests, whatever. And finally, the culture and stories of a community are part of that. So when you're mapping assets, you really are going to wind up deciding which of the assets we're going to include. And if you only do the services, you're really not capturing the assets. At a minimum, you want individuals and associations, and then the local institutions. The other thing about asset mapping is it's really a living, breathing thing. And I always tell people, don't create this incredible asset map and leave it on a shelf, whether that shelf is virtual or real. Use it for something. Help people connect with each other through it. Help people mobilize by using those assets. So that gets me into talking about why map community assets. When you do asset mapping, you can really shine a light on the gifts and talents of the community members. You can use those gifts and talents to connect people and to illuminate connections that are already there. What are the connections already there? You may think that a young person that you're working with doesn't have any connections. Come to find out, they stop at the same fast food place every day on their way home from school. Well, that's a connection, and we may not know that unless we're mapping somebody's community assets. Mapping assets also helps to foster the community pride and ownership. I was on a group this morning that was talking about how one woman said that her community was identified as an endangered town. Well, there is no community pride and ownership if your identified as a endangered town. But by mapping the assets, that really builds that pride and ownership. It builds capacity for action. And by action, I mean things people can do together in their community, or even ways to connect people in their community. And if you're involved in, wanting to organize things in the community, it really can help inform organizing. Because then, the basic premise of ABCD is that we build on what's already there. So mapping a community's assets will help us know what's already there and what we can build on. Am I still okay? Can you guys still hear me? I hope.
Yep, you're great.
Great. Sorry about that before. Here's a sample of a community asset map. And again, you're going to get the PowerPoint, so you'll be able to see this. This is one way of mapping, if you're looking at all 6 assets, where, it identifies the different 6 assets and all the different types of groups that might be, or the concepts that might be mapped under those 6 assets. So that's one thing you can do. And then here's another kind that really only does individuals, associations, and institutions. And the value of this is that, as you can see, individuals are at the center of this map. And we all know that the center of a map is the most important place to be, right? So by putting the gifts of individuals in the center of that map, then we recognize that, and we start from the center and work our way out. Now, you could take a map like this, or set up some kind of map like this, and you could think about an individual person you work with. So let's say I'm thinking about Shannon. Okay, so Shannon, I could put a little heart in the middle of that map and put Shannon in the middle, and I could identify Shannon's gift by putting that heart in the middle. And then surrounding Shannon, am I unstable again? My internet just told me I was unstable. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Yeah, you seem fine.
Great. Okay. I'll just trust that if I get stuck, you guys will yell at me. So please do that. Anyway, so you could put a heart in the middle, and you could put Shannon in the middle with her gifts and talents, the things she's passionate about. And then we can look and see who are the people in Shannon's community that have gifts and talents, even if those gifts and talents aren't directly related to Shannon's gifts and talents. We want to know who are those people in Shannon's life or in her community that she may not already be connected with. So maybe she's got a neighbor she hasn't connected with, but we get to know that neighbor and we find out that person has some gifts and talents that they would like to share. And they might be interested in sharing those with Shannon and getting to know about Shannon's gifts and talents. Or maybe there are some shared interests and passions where we could connect Shannon with some of those people. Then we can look at the local associations. What are the associations in that community where that person could have a possibility of sharing their own gifts and talents? Remember, this is about contributing, right? Contribution. It's not about looking for associations or institutions to support Shannon, okay? It's about where can Shannon contribute? Where can she build mutual relationships? So this kind of map is really a helpful map for that. And even when we look at the outer ring of local institutions, again, we're not saying to ourselves, how can Shannon get services from the YMCA? Or how can she get services from the school district? Rather, we're looking, where are the places in the community where Shannon might be able to contribute her gifts and talents and get to know people and connect with people and build those relationships. You know, this all goes back to the idea that our communities need everybody. So every person that you support, every person that is part of your program or your organization, whether they receive services or they're an employee or they're a board member, all those people have gifts and talents. All the people that have labels that have been historically labeled as considered negative labels or labels of deficit, all of those people have gifts and talents of some sort. And our goal is to discover those and discover where in the community they can contribute those gifts and talents, right? So we're going to be moving into groups one more time here. And here's the question that you're going to discuss in your group. And we're going to have, again, 10 minutes. And you're going to talk about how might you use asset maps as part of your work. And again, it could be any aspect of your work. You know, if you do a lot of different things, pick one piece of it and talk about that in your group. And I'm going to stop sharing. And either Molly or Shannon are putting people in groups, and you have 10 minutes again to do that. So if you have a
Yeah, it looks like Molly rearranged some of the rooms. Thanks, Molly.
somebody mentioned it's a great, thank you. First of all, somebody mentioned it's a really great networking tool. And yes, you know, part of what's involved when you asset map like this with someone is going out and talking to people, right? And you can use the concept of one-to-one conversations to discover what's in that community that you're working with, or to connect with people in that community. Somebody else mentioned that it can be a visual, and I always love that it's a visual. In fact, I encourage people to primarily think of it in visual terms. And we had a couple examples there, but there's lots more examples, or you can just be creative about how it looks for you or for your community or for the person that you're working with. David asks, how broad or specific can asset mapping be? Hey, David, do you want to take your phone off mute and just tell me more about your question?
Okay. Well, when I guess looked at the example of, you know, there was some of it was abstract, and I guess, you know, when I'm thinking, I'm do job development, I'm thinking of using it primarily with the people I work with, or, you know, like high school through all of adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, what I run into sometimes is very narrowly defined skills, and you know, trying to you know, find other places where those can go, you know, that are transferable. And I guess my group, we really thought that it's a positive way of presenting things, because you're looking for you know, strengths about these people, and it could help you identify different dynamics and all that. So that's very wide-ranging sort of applications. But I guess, you know, sort of curious a little more about how detailed it should get.
Sure. So I will tell you that the way I approach this stuff is I approach asset mapping like every other tool actually that I use, and I adapt it for every situation. And a couple of things I would say about that is to be true to the idea is probably the most important thing. And the idea is that, first of all, everybody has gifts and talents. Individuals should be at the center of the map. That we're looking for connections and relationship building. And the idea that, the other thing I would say to you, David, too, especially as you think about this having a role with employment, is think beyond the usual suspects, okay? We always go to the usual suspects. If somebody likes animals, we go to the Humane Society, we go to the vet, we go to the pet store. Think beyond that. Let's really get to know the neighbors that person has. Let's get to know the community, because that's the other part of this, right? Person-centered planning. I think this is what really builds on person-centered planning, because to me, person-centered planning really thinks about the community as it relates to the person. This really thinks about the community because of the value of the community, no matter who the person in the center is. And getting to know a community, well, you know, while we may be working with Jack, it's true that LaShonda is the person that all of a sudden we realize, holy cow, we should be thinking about LaShonda because there's this connection that we hadn't even considered before. So, you know, I think, you know, try to think about beyond the usual suspects, try to keep your mind open and look for connections that could be made or are already there, and look for what's already there. You know, again, building on what we already have. So very flexible tool. Megan brings up, it could be used to address an area where resources may not be available, like transportation. Yeah, in fact, okay, I'm just going to give you a really quick bonus here that's not in a slide. I'll remember to throw the slide in there. One of the things we talk about with communities is we think about communities through 3 questions. The first question is, what can a community do for itself? The second question is, what could a community do if they had some help? And the third question is, what does a community need someone outside of the community to do for them? And we think of those questions in that order, and that can be applied to individuals too. So I always say it's a great parenting tool. What can my kid do for herself? What can she do with a little help from me? And what does she need me to do that she can't do for herself? Now, the key to those 3 questions are, I don't get to decide the answers. The person most affected gets to decide those answers. And we always start with question number 1. And often we go to question number 3. In reality, we often go to question 3 first. But I bring those questions up because transportation is a great example. So when we think about transportation, what can that person or their family or their community already do around transportation? What could they do if they had a little bit of assistance? Maybe they just need gas money. Maybe they just need somebody to help make the connections. And the third question would be, what do they need somebody else to do? Which might mean, well, they might need specialized transportation because nothing else is available, right? So whatever idea, so this is just a bonus slide that, you know, I don't even have in here that I can send to you with those 3 questions on there. But that's a really good thing to think about in terms of what people, and it ties in real well, frankly, with the power ladder, if you will. All right, I'm going to go back to the chat really quick. Asset maps can be so helpful to have a living document that people can review. Oh, when there's turnover and new support. So you really want to think about capturing the strengths, right? And capturing the assets of the community of that person's in. And that says you're new to asset mapping. I get that. And this is a quick overview. So that's a really good thing. Somebody talked about coffee shop meetings. Yeah, often people go back to the comfort zone of problem-based approaches. So true. Sorry, excuse me. There's a lot more in here. I'm gonna hang on to these comments until the end because I have one more slide I want to share with you all. And then I'm willing to stick around if anybody wants to talk through any of the stuff that's already been shared, or they want to ask any more questions. So we just talked about this. So this is the final question for you, final questions for you guys about having that asset-based lens. I'm so sorry. As you think about your work, as you think about your organization's work, I want you to share in the chat an answer to one of these questions. Is there something you think is working really well now? Using your ABCD lens though. Remember, it's your ABCD lens. Is there something that's working well? Is there something you should stop doing? You know, we're famous in this state, and actually most states, of people get really great ideas and we implement a program and then we never stop doing it, even when better ideas come along. That's true of programs, that's true of services within programs, that's true of policies and procedures. Is there something you could stop doing? Is there something that you could just change or tweak? Or is there something new that you might want to start doing? So you could share those things in the chat as we're wrapping up here. And Shannon also shared shared in the chat to a survey for WPDD that we really would love to have you fill out. We'd like to know what kind of impact that this has had on you and your organization or your work. We'd like to know, the board also has additional questions that they collect for all their activities that they would love to be able to ask you for, to answer. It won't take you long to do the survey, so we'd love to have you do the survey. So I'm not sure if there's, let me just do this. I was going to try to put the questions in the chat and I should have written them someplace else. So let me just quick do that so I can see people. Okay, so I popped them in there so I can stop sharing my screen and see all your wonderful faces. There we go. All right, while you take a moment to put that in the chat, is there any last words anybody would like to share or any additional questions? So feel free to unmute yourself if you would like to say something here. I have some comments coming in here. So Mabel says the individual is the asset. Absolutely. Helping others see their value is super empowering for them. I want to do more supporting my clients and involving their strengths and how that relates to their community. Exactly. Remember to change or remember to listen more than I talk. Oh, so true. And I've just been in the position of talking way too much, but but I really, that is such a important thing. I remember somebody saying to me once, you know, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means we should be listening twice as much as we talk. So I always thought that was funny. Implement using asset mapping as it'll strengthen person-centered planning. You know, I'll look and see if I have any blank templates or other handouts that might be helpful, and I'll include those with the resources. A number of people are going to put asset mapping in here. Active listening, great. Use more questions. Questions are more powerful than answers. Isn't that the truth, Kim? I really think so. I love questions, and I love questions that don't have answers. That just get us to stop and think, right? Okay, somebody's excited about helping clients support the strengths and assets of people that they serve. Sharing the information on asset mapping. Oh yeah, I got a couple of people are looking for blank asset mapping templates. Giving choices to folks, learn more about asset mapping. You know, there's something to be said as well as for those of you looking for templates. You'll have a copy of the one that that's in the PowerPoint. There's something to be said about just drawing it on a big piece of paper where you can really, anybody who's in the room can see it. And you know, that's a really fun thing because everybody's focused on one thing and it's in front of everybody, can be as colorful or decorative as you wish. Asset mapping doesn't have to take place over like an hour either. It could be an ongoing thing as assets are discovered. You know, people can add things to them. Yes, you can snap a photo of it afterwards to store safely in virtual format. That's a great idea. Choices for people. Lots of great comments there. Any other comments? I'll look around and see. I'll at least send the one that I have, but I have a couple other articles about different ways of doing asset mapping and questions to ask yourself when asset mapping. You know, questions like, why are we doing this asset map? Who's going to help create it? What procedure or way, how are we going to learn about these assets? How are we going to collect the assets in our community? How are we going to share this asset map? Who are we going to share it with? Who gets to decide how it's shared? you know, again, the person at the center should be the person that has the most power over it, right? They should be able to decide, I don't want my asset map going anywhere. Or I want it shared with the world. You know, a lot of times we use photos on asset maps, you know, photos of who are the people involved, you know, so you can really, again, you know, going back to David's question earlier, you can really, really individualize these. All right, I see it is 3 o'clock Central Time, so we are wrapping up, and I just want to say thank you to Shannon and Molly for inviting me to be with you all today and on the last workshop. And you'll have my email address when the resources go out. So feel free to contact me if you have questions or thoughts. You know, I'm always open to conversation. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. And I did just drop that survey in the chat again. If you could click on that and open your browser, you know, before you sign off, that would be great. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll send out the follow-up information soon. Thanks,
All right.
Deb.
Thank you, everybody.